Ever get frustrated with tech that just doesn't quite get it? Like, imagine you're a self-driving car, right? You're cruising along, come to a red light, traffic's moving, but your car, nope, just sits there, stalled.
It's the perfect example, actually. And it's exactly what these AI experts, Brachman and Levesque, focus on in their book, Machines Like Us. It's not that the AI is broken, it's more that it's missing that common sense we humans, just kind of have.
Which is wild when you think about how much AI can do. But this book really digs into why that common sense is so tricky to program.
Right. Like, it's easy to assume AI just needs more data, faster processing. But Machines Like Us shows it's much deeper than that. It's not just about facts and figures, but about how we understand the world, how we make those judgment calls on the fly.
So, like, what they're saying is common sense isn't just knowing stuff. It's about knowing how to use that knowledge in different situations.
Totally. It's about picking up on unspoken rules, adapting to the unexpected, all those things that make us, well, human.
And they even use this example, a knight on a chessboard, to illustrate their point.
Oh, yeah, that's a good one. Shows how something so simple for us, like understanding a slightly different chessboard, completely throws off how an AI has to think.
It's like, it's not just teaching a machine chess, it's teaching it to understand the very idea of rules, how those rules can change and how to adapt, right? Like the difference between memorizing phrases from a book and actually understanding the language.
100%. And this has huge implications, way beyond chessboards or self-driving cars, right? Think about AI trying to understand human language, like Google Translate. Good for words, short bits, but a whole story. With nuance, implied meaning, that's where they hit a wall. No common sense to connect the dots.
And this is where the book gets really interesting, because they explain how even a phrase, something simple like a small dog.
Even that requires a ton of background knowledge, unspoken stuff, to fully get it.
Exactly. Like we instantly think about breeds, typical sizes, maybe even the context of why someone's saying it.
Yeah.
But AI, without that well of common sense, stuck.
Absolutely. Trying to apply some literal rule to it, it just wouldn't make sense.
Yeah.
And that's the heart of the challenge, figuring out how to build that intuition, those layers of understanding into AI systems.
So how do we even begin to bridge this gap, to give AI that common sense? The book dives into something called the symbolic approach.
And this is where things get really interesting, because it's about trying to represent common sense in a way a machine can grasp, like giving an AI its own mental map of the world.
Okay, so instead of just knowing hospital is a place, the AI starts to get the concept of a hospital, the purpose, the roles, even the emotions tied to it.
And this mental map, it's built on these things that the book calls world models and conceptual models, giving the AI a structured way to understand things, how they're connected, all of that.
So it's not just memorizing definitions, it's more like building up a web of understanding.
Exactly. And the way they propose doing this is through this symbolic approach. It's almost like how we teach kids, right? Step by step, using logic and rules. If A, then B.
If it's a bird, then it can fly, that kind of thing.
Exactly. Start with the basics and build from there.
Mm.
But here's where it gets tricky, because the book points out defining even simple concepts for a machine, way harder than you'd think.
Yeah, I can imagine. Like, how do you teach an AI what a hospital really is? There's so much variation.
Right. The book gives this example trying to define a hospital or a birthday party. Sounds easy, but then you get into it, there are exceptions, fuzzy boundaries, all sorts of things that trip up a machine.
Because a field hospital is still a hospital, even if it doesn't look like the ones we picture.
Exactly. Or a birthday party can be a quiet dinner or a huge bash. So just defining everything out explicitly, like the symbolic approach tries to do, it hits a wall pretty quickly.
Because it's not just the amount of information, it's that nuance, the unspoken rules and exceptions.
And that's what makes our common sense so powerful, but so hard to replicate.
So if simply defining everything doesn't work, what's the alternative?
Well, the book suggests this really fascinating idea, annotations.
The annotations, what are those?
It's like adding these extra layers of information, these notes, that refine the AI's understanding. To give the example of birds, right?
Okay, so you might start by telling the AI if it's a bird, then it can fly. But obviously there are exceptions to that.
Exactly. And that's where the annotations come in. You add a note, except penguins, which are birds, but they don't fly.
So it's like acknowledging that most rules have exceptions and teaching the AI how to deal with those exceptions without completely derailing its understanding of the rule itself.
Precisely. It's about building in that flexibility, that ability to hold those contradictions and still make sense of the world. Because we do it all the time.
It's true. Like if you grew up thinking all birds fly and then see a penguin, You don't suddenly assume everything you know is wrong. You adapt.
Right. And that's what these annotations are trying to do for AI, help them adapt and refine their understanding over time.
So it's less about giving them all the answers up front and more about giving them the tools to learn and adapt as they encounter new information.
And honestly, that's a lot closer to how we learn and grow as well.
That's a really interesting point. So we've got these symbolic representations with their limitations and now these annotations to add nuance. But how do we ensure all of this actually leads to AI we can trust?
That's where this idea of transparent AI comes in, which the
Oh,
book dives into as well.
transparent AI. So being able to see inside the AI's mind, so to speak.
In a way, yes. It's the idea that it's not enough to just get an answer from an AI. We need to understand the why behind it.
Yeah, because otherwise it's like, how much can you trust an answer if you don't know how you got there, you know?
Exactly.
Hmm.
Especially with those bigger decisions, self-driving cars, medical diagnoses,
Mhm.
that transparency becomes crucial.
So how do we actually get there? Does the book talk about solutions for making AI more transparent?
They do. And it's not just about showing your work like some kind of equation. It's about the AI being able to explain its reasoning in a way that, well, we get it. The logic, the uncertainties, the whole process.
That makes sense, especially as AI gets more autonomous. If you don't know why it's making a choice, how can you trust it to handle the unexpected, right?
And it goes beyond just trust, too. It's about accountability. One thing the book brings up, really important, at least for now, if an AI messes up, the blame still falls on us.
Us being the humans behind it.
Right, we designed it, trained it, all of that. Which makes sense because we're still in the early stages.
But as AI gets more independent, that line starts to blur a little.
Exactly. And that's why this whole transparency thing is so crucial. It's figuring out those guidelines for AI, its limits, and who takes the hit if things go south.
It's almost like teaching a kid a recipe versus teaching him to cook.
No perfect analogy.
Hmm.
With the recipe, they can follow steps. But in a new situation, they're lost. But understanding the why of cooking, they can adapt, create something new.
And that's what we want from AI, right? Not just rule followers, but something that can reason, work with us.
Totally. And that brings us back to common sense. It's not just about rules, but those gray areas, those ethical dilemmas where there's not a clear right or wrong. The book uses this example. Imagine an AI, right? Trying to understand the phrase, he was so angry he could eat a horse.
Okay, yeah, I see where this is going. Would AI take it literally?
Exactly. It shows how much we rely on common sense to get those facts of speech, those things we say that don't always mean what they sound like. And it's not just about humor. It's about understanding the emotions, the context behind what we say.
It really does make you think about how much we communicate without actually saying it, and how tough that is to teach a machine.
It all ties back to transparency. If the AI can't explain its understanding, why it makes a choice that seems weird based on pure logic, it loses our trust.
So are these AI experts, Brachman and Levesque, saying that true AI, the kind that gets us, is still a way off?
They are. Yeah, they're very honest about the challenges ahead. But what's great about machines like us, they don't just point out the problems. By understanding our own common sense, how we think, they say we can start building machines that can kind of do the same, even if it's not exactly like a human mind.
So less about copying our intelligence and more like understanding the principles behind it. Like a plane doesn't flap its wings, but it still flies.
Perfect analogy. It's about figuring out what matters for intelligence and finding ways to make that work for machines.
What I find so fascinating is trying to build AI with common sense is also making us think about our own minds more.
It's like holding up a mirror to how we think. And honestly, that's one of the most interesting things about machines like us. It's not just about tech. It's about what it means to be human.
And maybe, just maybe, all of this leads to machines that don't just copy us, but actually collaborate with us, bring something new to the table. So there you have it, our deep dive into Machines Like Us by Brachman and Levesque. A really interesting look at common sense, why it's so hard for AI to grasp, and what it means for the future of, well, intelligence itself. We hope you enjoyed this deep dive and that it's given you something to think about.